Thanks very much for this. And look, thank you to everyone for coming on such a dreadful night in such big numbers. What I'm going to just try and concentrate is some of the personalities who were involved. This is about the Dublin Hospitals Cup, but before the Dublin Hospitals Cup, there was Dublin Hospitals Rugby, and that's where we get the over 140 years. So just to try and set the scene, over 140 years ago, Ireland was part of the United Kingdom. And this man here was our Prime Minister for most of this period, William Gladstone. The main social and political issues outside Dublin at that time were widespread evictions because tenant farmers couldn't pay their rents. The main political activist was this man. He wasn't very well known at the time. He'd just been elected an MP, Charles Stewart Parnell, and probably more importantly, this man, Michael Davitt. Davitt did an enormous amount through his land league to try and support these tenants who were being evicted. He went on to become an icon of nationalism, one of the first patrons of the GAA. What probably isn't very well known about him, though, is he had two sons, and they both did medicine. His eldest son, Michael, had a stellar undergraduate career, but his main interest outside medicine was rugby. He played rugby for Bective, he played for UCD, and mostly for the Mater Hospital. And he captained the Mater Hospital in 1912 to a final when they were beaten by a very good Duns team. His other son, Robert Emmett Davitt, also did medicine in the Mater Hospital and played with the Mater. So just an interesting link there between Irish nationalism and the Dublin Hospitals Cup. At this time, back in the 1860s, 1870s, interest in ball games was really booming. The only problem was it was totally unregulated. There were no rules at all. And in the early 1860s, this group came together to try and agree rules and form governing bodies, giving rise to association football or soccer. Out of that morphed rugby, and then later on in this country, Gaelic games, giving us the three most commonly played sports in this country at the moment. But rugby was unique amongst all these three sports in the role that medical students and doctors in London and in Dublin would play in the development of this sport. The oldest rugby club in the world is Guy's Hospital in London. Now, I think Trinity sometimes dispute that. And the oldest rugby competition, and there's general consensus about this, is the London Hospital competition, or United Hospitals Challenge Cup. In Dublin, at this time, medical students in the teaching hospitals were forming their own rugby team. And from 1878, there was an annual fixture every year between a Dublin United Hospitals team and the rest of Dublin, which would have been teams like Lansdowne Wanderers and Monkstown. This is the team from 1878. These are all the players with the hospitals that they represented. The underlying names were players who did or would be capped for Ireland. This chap, William Cox Neville from Duns, would captain Ireland twice in 1879. Ireland had been played their first international in 1875 with a team that included 6 Dublin Hospitals players against an English team that contained 5 London Hospitals players. The problem was we had an abysmal record. We were hockeyed in that match. We didn't actually win a match for about 6 years. And one of the problems was that there were 2 governing unions. of rugby. There was the Irish Football Union and the Northern Football Union, which controlled the clubs around Belfast and Ulster. After some years, these agreed to merge, and the IRFU only had its first meeting in 1880. Now, the main catalyst to the formation of the Irish Rugby Football Union was this man, William Cox Neville. He had graduated from Trinity in Duns in 1978, and he arranged a meeting between the Irish Football Union and the Northern Football Union in Trinity, and just proceeded to talk, and every point they raised, he just dealt with every single one of them. They ended up just conceding on everything, and his role in doing this was recognised by him being elected the first president of the Irish Rugby Football Union. In his professional life, Neville went on and specialised in obstetrics, and he designed this forceps, which still bears his name, the Neville Barnes forceps, which was used for many years in obstetrics. He died relatively young in 1904. So really major input from a Dublin Hospitals player in the foundation of the Irish Rugby Football Union. Now, coming on to the Hospitals Cup, this really emanated from a meeting in early 1882 between representatives from all these hospitals. Now, many of you of a certain vintage will not know anything about these hospitals, and those of you otherwise may have forgotten. So just to remind you, this is an adapted map from Davis Coakley's book in St. James's, showing St. Stephen's Green, the South Circular Road, the College Green, the Liffey, and starting with the old Vincent's used to be on Stephen's Green. Sir Patrick Dunn's was down on Grand Canal Street. And then Royal City of Dublin was on Bagot Street. Mercer's behind College of Surgeons, the Adelaide Hospital off George's Street, the Meath Hospital off Heytesbury Street. And then a little bit out of the way was Dr. Stephen's Hospital opposite Euston Station, and then on the north side you had Jervis Street and the Richmond. And the one hospital I've left out there is the only hospital that is still where it is at the moment, and that is the Mater Hospital. So following that meeting, a committee was elected to draw up rules for the competition and to make the draw for the first year. Most of these were students. This man, Frank Houston, was a young surgeon in the Adelaide Hospital. He would remain involved with the Adelaide Hospital until he died, with the Hospitals Union until he died in 1915. But this other man, Henry Stoker from the Richmond, was particularly interesting. He was the nephew of Bram Stoker's. He had 6 brothers, all of whom qualified in medicine. Actually, one of them, Frank, did dentistry, but still played for the Dublin Hospitals because he was a College of Surgeons graduate. Another brother, Ernest, both of these were capped for Ireland. Frank was also a very accomplished tennis player, and he won Wimbledon doubles with this man, Joshua Pym, on 2 occasions. So he's just one of 2 rugby internationals to have won a major tournament in Wimbledon. Do any of you know who the other one was? No, he won Junior Wimbledon. A chap called Park, J.C. Park. In any case, Pym also actually won the singles as well. And Pym was a Dublin doctor. He never played medicine. He spent most of his time as medical officer in Loughlinstown Hospital, actually. In any case, the first competition was played. Dunstan the Mead ended up in the final, that was played in Lansdowne Road. The Irish Times reports that it was played in front of all the medical students and doctors in town. Not to speak of a large crowd. I don't think they'd be allowed to say that now. But in any case, it was a splendid struggle that the Meath won by 5 points to 3. The committee had acquired the Dublin Hospitals Cup, which has now assumed legendary proportions for very good reason. First of all, the cup must be the oldest sporting trophy in the country. It's over 200 years old, dating from 1812. Secondly, it's the work of this man, Paul Storr, who is the most famous silversmith in the British Empire at the time. Most of his work was purchased by George III and George IV. And we know all this from the hallmark that is actually on the cup. Despite this, it has been treated despicably by the men who have won it. And this was, even the Irish Times, this is over 60 years ago, remember. Like many other things, the trophy has collected many scars in its 72-year-old peregrinations through Dublin's hospital. That it survives at all is no mean tribute to its maker. For rough though the going may be in the field, no player is likely to be put to any feat of endurance comparable to that inflicted on the hospital cup. And any of you who have been involved in the celebrations will know exactly what he means. In any case, the other main trophy from the Hospitals Cup is the medal. And I know a lot of you treat this very, very casually. But the medal also dates from the early 1880s. And apart from all the classical symbolism in the middle of it that you could go on with, what's really interesting, if you look at the outside, there are these shamrocks, which is not surprising for an Irish trophy. But at the top, you will see there is an English rose, and at the bottom, you will see there's a Scotch thistle. Now, why there should be an English rose and a Scotch thistle on the Dublin Hospital medal, I don't know. And one can only surmise that perhaps a number of the participants in the competition were doing, from England and Scotland, were doing medicine there. In any case, just to move on, the competition was now up and running. Duns and the Meath totally dominated for the first years. At a national level, Ireland were not doing particularly well until 1894 when they won, when a team captained by this man, Edmund Forrest, who was a medical student in Duns, won their first Triple Crown. The same year, Forrest would help Duns win the Hospitals Cup. He had captained Duns to win the Hospitals Cup the previous year. And this very unique distinction was repeated again in 1948 when a medical student in Jervis Street, Carl Mullen, captained Ireland to their first Grand Slam win. In the middle of that campaign, Carl Mullen also captained Jervis Street to winning their one and only Hospitals Cup. So a very unique distinction for two Dublin Hospitals players to have captained Ireland to their first Triple Crown and first Grand Slam wins. There were two other stalwarts, hospital stalwarts, this man C.V. Rook. Rook entered Trinity in 1886 and left in 1900 with a BA degree. Now, what he did for the 14 years isn't entirely clear, but he did play a lot of rugby for Trinity and for Ireland. He got a lot of caps for Ireland. He also played in the back row, and he was the first back row forward to actually start to try and disrupt scrum half and out half play. The New Zealander Dave Gallagher would bring this to a very high point, so much so that the British media considered it very unsporting about what he was doing. The other person here is Tom Crean. This is not the explorer. In some ways he's more famous, as you'll see later on, but Crean was captain of Vincent's for 4 years. 2 years later, Ireland would win the championship. This time they had 4 Hospitals Cup players. Rook and Crean were still there, and joined by Larry Bulger, who was one of 2 brothers who'd been in Blackrock College, and Andrew Clinch, who would be the first of 4 generations of clinchers to have played in this competition. After this tournament, a British Isles team was selected to go to South Africa, and included in the team were 9 Irishmen with 4 Dublin Hospitals players. Clinch, Crean, Bulger, and also this uncapped player, Cecil Boyd. Although it was captained by this fellow Johnny Hammond from Cambridge and Blackheath, he got injured very early on in the tournament, and Crean took over the captaincy. It was a highly successful tour. They won all their provincial games. They won the Test Series 3-1. After that, Crean actually remained in Johannesburg working as a medic, but joined up the Royal Army Medical Corps at the outbreak of the Boer War in 1899. He was involved in a number of these battles, but in this Battle of Tigerloof, he got wounded. Despite this, he continued to look after 3 injured soldiers, despite the fact that they were under enemy fire from only 150 yards away. It was only a matter of time before Crean would get injured, get shot again, and he was shot. This time they thought mortally, but he extracted himself from that and the 3 soldiers, following which he was awarded the Victoria Cross. Now, the Victoria Cross is the highest award that can be awarded in the British Armed Services. Only 4 rugby internationals have received it. 3 of them are actually from one club. Do you know what club it is? Wanderers, exactly. 3 of them are from Wanderers. So in any case, after that, Crean was honoured by the College of Surgeons and invited to receive an honorary fellowship there. So he returned to Dublin, and before receiving the fellowship, he was entertained by the Vincent's Hospital Rugby Club in Dolphin, in the Dolphin Hotel, which is now Dolphin House down in Temple Bar. The Vincent's captain that year was a chap called Paget Butler. Sadly, he would go on after qualifying to join the British Army, and he died in the First World War. Crean died in 1923, but in 2002, he was featured on a stamp issued by South Africa to commemorate the Boer War. So quite an achievement. In any case, 1896 was also a pivotal year in the Hospitals Cup, because for the first time, a team other than Duns or the Meath would win the cup. The Richmond, captained by Larry Bulger, who was already a rugby international, had gone on that tour to South Africa, was a sprint champion. He led the team that beat Duns 3-0. But as an undergraduate, Bulger had given a huge amount of time to the Dublin Hospitals Union, organising meetings as treasurer and secretary. He organised the first Dublin versus London Hospitals game. So it was very fitting that not only did he actually lead the team, but he scored the try that actually won it for them. After qualifying, Bulger went to London, where he joined his older brother Michael, in practice, and both of them played for London Irish. Now, Michael had graduated in 1890. He also was capped for Ireland. He played for Trinity, and he played for the Richmond. But he's probably best remembered in his role as medical officer in the 1908 Olympics. And in the marathon race, this man, Italian, Dorando Pietri, was the first to enter the White City Stadium, quite a long distance ahead of everybody else. He had 2 kilometres to run. Unfortunately, he started to stumble. It was a warm day, and he went and he collapsed. Bulger, as a medical attendant, went over, tended to him, helped him up. He ended up falling 4 times in the final round, and it was essentially manhandled over the line. Of course, the American, who, despite the fact he was some way back, came second, immediately lodged a complaint. Pietri was disqualified, and the American awarded the race. And Michael became a national celebrity, because everybody remembered him. The next year, 1897, Duns were really out for revenge, and they came across this very rookie Mater team, because if you remember that initial list I showed you, Vincent's and the Mater were not in the initial organising hospital. They only joined later, the Mater particularly later, around 1890. But this turned out to be a most exciting and sensational match. Duns had a very good team out. They had their 3 internationals, and they also had a number of Trinity players. They went ahead by 7 points to 0, but Mater hung in there, and with trials by Curley and Blaney, unfortunately Tom Little, their place kicker, missed both conversions. So in injury time, Duns were still leading by 7 points to 6. They were pressing on the Mater line. Frank Purser, who is an international and the future president of the College of Physicians, almost got over. But in injury time, this chap Carroll intercepted, ran up to the halfway line, was tackled, but just before he was tackled, he offloaded to Little. And the future Irish international showed a clean pair of heels to the covering Duns players and scored underneath the post. He missed the conversion again, but it didn't make any difference. So possibly one of the most famous victories ever for the Mater Hospital. In the first 2 centuries, in the first 2 decades of the next centuries, 2 teams got their name on the cup who had never won it before. The Adelaide Hospital, who'd been there from the very beginning and had been beaten in 8 finals, managed finally to win. And this man, Frank Houston, who was still involved in the competition, was still there. The other team which would win would be Vincent's in 1913 and 1914. But then the Great War intervened and the competition stopped. Now, there's a lot of scrolls and plaques and books written about the doctors and students who were involved in the Great War and gave their lives. But the Bateman Cup has a special connection with the Dublin Hospitals Cup. The Bateman Cup is played off between 4 teams who each one that has won their provincial cup. In recent years, it's been dominated totally by Cork Constitution. But it was initially presented by Godfrey Bateman in memory of his 2 sons, Arthur and Reginald, who both sadly died in the last year of the war. Arthur graduated from Duns in 1914. He wasn't a great rugby player, and probably the height of his achievement in rugby was being on the victorious Duns team in 1912. He was also on the Duns team that were beaten by Vincent's in 1913. So a very poignant connection between this trophy and the Hospitals Cup. I'm now trespassing in Professor Farrell's period, but just very briefly, the competition resumed in 1920. Duns contested the first 5 finals, so clearly they were still the team to beat, but they actually won only one of them, which just shows how competitive the competition had become. The loss to the Mead was surprising, but the first try that the Mead got makes very interesting reading. Van Druten gathered the ball in the loose and set De Bruin going, who passed to Kruger. The right wing ran close to the line and when tackled by Parr, passed to the supporting Murray, who who scored a meritorious try. So clearly none of these are from Dublin 4. And they were all South Africans who had come to Dublin to study medicine. Some of them are very good rugby players. They played for Trinity. They actually had their own Trinity South African team. And they also played for the hospitals that they were involved in, mostly the Meath and Bagot Street. But Van Druten was by far and away the best player. Now, we don't have a picture of that Meath team, but this is a picture of the resident and visiting staff in the Meath Hospital in 1922. And besides it including two presidents of the College of Surgeons and two presidents of the College of Physicians, up here at the back in the white coat with his arm folded is Jan Van Druten. According to Terence Millen, the famous pioneering neurologist and rugby and international who played both with him and against him, Van Druten was by far the best back row forward in the 4 home countries at this time. Van Druten returned to South Africa when he was finished his studies, and he was capped by South Africa against New Zealand and the Lions. But Ned Van Esbeck always claims that if he had been in England or Scotland, they would have capped him. The IRFU had a policy that they would that you had to have Irish blood to be capped. Clearly, as we saw from this morning's team, that policy has changed. So I'm going to finish there, and thanks very much.